still working on racial justice issues and still working on voting rights issues, just another place.
Okay, thank you, Amir. And our second speaker for this evening is Marcia Johnson. She is with the League at the national level, and she is the general counsel for the League of Women Voters. That means she's our lawyer, everybody. And they are both very well informed about the subjects that we're going to talk about tonight. I've asked Amir to speak a bit about the SAVE Act, and Marcia will talk to us about the lawsuit that the League is bringing with partner groups fighting the executive order by President Trump, which is it's all about voter suppression when you read that thing. So, Marcia, is there anything you want to say about yourself that I might have left out?
Thanks for having me, Joanne. It's Marcia,
Marcia.
and
Okay.
yeah, I'm really happy to be here this evening. I started at the League of Women Voters in October of 2024, so this is my sixth month in the new role. Very excited to join you all. And Amir and I, in our former roles, worked very closely together. So I'm here presenting with an old friend and just looking forward to sharing with you all about the lawsuit and answering any questions that you have. So thanks again for having me.
Thank you. And then when both speakers are finished, we'll have a Q&A session. So let's start with Amir.
Thanks so much, Joanne. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining. It's always great to be with the League and in particular the Oxford chapter. I know that y'all are always hitting the pavement and doing everything that you can to encourage voter registration and civic engagement. And so it's always a joy and a pleasure to be with you all. I wish that we could be talking about a happier topic, but we are here, and I've been asked to talk a little bit about a bill that was introduced in Congress this session called the SAVE Act. Um, I'll provide a little bit of an overview of the kind of background of the SAVE Act. It's not the first time that Congress has considered this bill, and then I'll go into some of the key provisions of the SAVE Act and talk a little bit about kind of what we might expect over the next few months um, as it pertains to the SAVE Act. And so, um, folks likely remember this election cycle, the 2024 election cycle, a major narrative that one side of the political spectrum was espousing throughout the election cycle was that there is a huge problem in the United States of non-citizen voting. That was a narrative that the Trump campaign would put forward. That was a narrative that we saw a lot of election denier organizations put forward. And what is important about this narrative is that one, it wasn't supported by any evidence or any fact. Non-citizen voting in our election system is incredibly rare. And it is, when it has happened, it has been, for the most part, due to a mistake on the part of the person who actually registers to vote or casts their ballot to vote. And so, and going back a step, when I say incredibly rare, I mean infinitesimally rare. States like Georgia have actually done audits of their voter rolls to try to identify how many non-citizens are on their voter rolls and have cast ballots. And the numbers are incredibly small in the single digits. And so this is not a problem in our election system. It is something, like I said, that's incredibly rare. And so this narrative that was laid during the 2024 election cycle was not based in any fact. Nevertheless, we know that one of the reasons that they used this narrative was to set up a potential election challenge and an effort to sabotage the 2024 election results if the results didn't go in a certain way. Ultimately, that didn't pan out because the results did go in their way. And so we didn't see the types of election contests or threats to election certification on the basis of purported non-citizen voting that many groups had prepared for, including Marcia at the time, spent, I know, a lot of time thinking and working on efforts to prevent election sabotage, but those threats didn't materialize for the most part. But the narrative of non-citizen voting has persisted beyond the 2024 election cycle. And that narrative really serves as the basis, or in reality, the pretext for the bill that we're talking about today, the SAVE Act. So the SAVE Act, what it does, and again, this isn't the first time it was introduced in Congress. It was also introduced last year, or last session, introduced again this session. What the SAVE Act does is that it requires that states, or it imposes a requirement on states that registrants have to provide what's called documentary proof of citizenship in order to be able to register to vote. And documentary proof of citizenship means, under the SAVE Act, one of a few different types of documents that would actually prove that you are a citizen of the country. So, for example, under the SAVE Act, a passport would be considered documentary proof of citizenship. A birth certificate would be considered documentary proof of citizenship, naturalization papers, and then a couple of other types of different documents. Now, on its face, this seems like a relatively innocuous requirement, right? That, we already know in our system that only US citizens are able to vote in federal elections. And so one might think, well, why wouldn't you have to show or prove that you're a citizen? In reality, why this is such a big problem and why it is actually a massive voter suppression mechanism is because there are massive swaths of the country that don't have the necessary documents to prove their citizenship, or it would be very difficult for large numbers of people to acquire or to find the necessary documents to prove their citizenship. So, a few numbers. I talked about passports being one of the possible documents to prove your citizenship. Nearly half of all Americans, that's more than 140 million Americans, do not have a passport. I'm talking about American citizens, obviously, do not have a passport, and so would not be able to use a passport to prove their citizenship, or would have to spend the hundreds of dollars and go through the time and expense of acquiring a passport. Nearly 21 million Americans do not have any of the documents that would be necessary to prove citizenship under the SAVE Act. And so that would essentially mean that 21 million Americans would not be able to register or re-register to vote under the requirements of the SAVE Act. Now, that's an important piece, what I just mentioned, that the SAVE Act requires showing these documents not only to register for the first time, but also to re-register. So if you wanted to update your registration because you've moved to a different county or a different state, you would again have to show these types of documents to prove your citizenship. Another important piece of this, and this has got a lot of media coverage, you might have read about this, is that the SAVE Act makes it incredibly difficult for millions of married women who might have taken the last name of their spouse to be able to register to vote, because their names on their birth certificates, which is one of the potential documents that you can use, does not match the name that they would be using to register to vote. And so there would have to be additional documentation or some other avenue for them to show that they are actually citizens of the United States and they would have to show documents that show their current name. And so we know based on a lot of analysis that's been done of data related to these documents and the different types of populations that would be impacted, that the SAVE Act's requirements would impose disproportionate burdens on Black voters and other voters of color, on young voters who might find it difficult to, they probably don't know where their birth certificate is because it might be at home. They don't live at home anymore. They live somewhere. They might be living on campus or living somewhere else. They might not have a passport yet because they haven't had to travel out of the country. It imposes disproportionate burdens on poor people, obviously, because it costs money to get most of these documents. And it poses disproportionate burdens on voters living in rural areas because another piece of this is that the SAVE Act requires showing documentary proof of citizenship in person to an election official. And so a registrant would have to travel to an elections office in order to actually, well, first they would have to find the relevant documents. They would have to take those documents to the election office and show them in person to the election official in order to be able to register to vote. And that could take, many people, especially in rural areas, live 20, 30 minutes, an hour away from their election office. And so that it just imposes an additional burden on them to be able to register. Now, this piece, the in-person piece, is important because when you think about it, what that means is that it effectively eliminates online voter registration because you have to show these documents in person to an election official. It effectively eliminates voter registration drives, which the league I know is incredibly active in because when you're registering at a voter registration drive, you're not showing any type of document to an election official. You're just turning in a voter registration card. And so it would effectively eliminate voter registration drives. And we know that black voters and other voters of color disproportionately register using voter registration drives. It would also effectively eliminate or significantly undermine automatic voter registration at the DMV because people don't generally show up to the DMV with these types of documents when they're getting their driver's license. And so what the impact of this bill would be significant burdens on a variety of different populations. And it would be one of the most significant voter suppression bills that we've ever witnessed in this country's history. I think it's important to note, we've seen a barrage of voter suppression bills coming through state legislatures since the Shelby County decision, and particularly since the 2020 election. We haven't seen the federal government, we haven't seen Congress pass voter suppression bill really ever. And so this would be the first voter suppression bill that Congress has ever enacted. And so it's incredibly significant. It's nefarious, and it has the potential to cause a sea change in how we and in how Americans engage in the political process. Now, where we are in the legislative process right now is that the House, the bill was introduced in the House by a Texas congressman named Chip Roy. It passed the House by a very narrow margin, uh, nearly a party line vote. All Republicans voted for it, 4 Democrats voted for it. Um, and now it is going to the Senate. We don't know exactly what the timing is in the Senate. I will say, we do hope that it will fail in the Senate because we still have the cloture rule, which requires 60 votes in order for the Senate to be able to consider it. And so we don't expect there to be 60 votes in favor of the SAVE Act in the Senate, but that doesn't mean that we can rest on our laurels. And so what we have been really active in at Fair Fight and what our colleagues, including the league, have been really, really putting a lot of energy and effort into is lobbying our senators to make sure that we have enough no votes in the Senate to kill this bill. And so what I would encourage everyone here on the call to do is call your senators, call Cindy Hyde-Smith, call Roger Wicker, tell them that you do not want them to vote yes on the SAVE Act. You want them to vote no on the SAVE Act because it has such a terrible impact on the ability of Americans to engage in the political process. And tell your friends, tell your community members, tell your churches, because like I said, this is one of the most suppressive bills that Congress has ever considered in our country's history. And so we want to make sure that it dies in the Senate. I'll say even if the Senate uh, kills this bill, I don't think that the fight will be over. I expect that the bill in some form will come back. And so it's incredibly important not only for us to talk to our senators and call them and ask them to vote no on this bill, but for us to be pushing out the narrative that non-citizen voting is not a problem in the United States, that we don't want our elected officials to be limiting our ability to cast ballots. We want them to be expanding our ability and our access to the ballot box, which means that we want them to vote for bills like the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, like the Freedom to Vote Act. We want them to be doing things that actually make it easier for Americans to vote, not harder. And so I'll stop there. I'll turn it over to Marcia to talk about the executive order, which is related to all of what I just talked about, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Hey, 1 second, Marcia. I just also want to say yesterday, there was, it was either yesterday or the day before, Trump fired the entire board of directors of the post office system. And he's privatizing the post office and handing it over to his Secretary of Commerce. And this is coming at a time when a very important election, the midterm elections, is happening next year. And it's not an accident. When Amir said they are planning voter suppression on a national level, all of these things are coming together and we need to stay aware of them. And with that, I will hand it over to Marcia.
Thank you. Good evening again. So, as Amir mentioned, the executive order issued by President Trump on March 25th is a very close cousin of the SAVE Act. And what the executive order does is what we've seen this administration doing throughout the time it's been in effect, which is to usurp the authority of Congress. So before I talk to you about what the executive order says, I just want to highlight that the president has no authority to make rules and regulations regarding elections or to ask the Election Assistance Commission to change the federal voter registration form, which is what the executive order does. So, we're seeing names like the SAVE Act and this executive order entitled Preserving and Protecting the Integrity of American Elections, which is this really cynical way of first creating a crisis that doesn't exist, which Amir highlighted very well, and then using this crisis that doesn't exist to focus on election integrity based on mis and disinformation that was created by the administration and its allies. And so some of the things that the EO does that I wanted to highlight is similar to the SAVE Act. It requires documentary proof of citizenship in order to register to vote. And so it very explicitly mentions a US passport, a real ID that has citizenship information on it. Most real IDs don't. A military ID that includes citizenship information. Most military IDs do not. And then there's a vague mention of providing other citizenship documents along with other IDs. It also requires that the state records information from these documentary proof of citizenship, and which, it's very, there's so many reasons why having someone walk around with their citizenship papers in the time of identity theft and um, but also requiring the states to write down the unique information that's on these documents. It also requires the Congress or the EAC actually to not disperse funds to states that do not adopt the federal form should they add documentary proof of citizenship on to it. It also changes absentee ballot deadlines. So I think there are 18 states that allow if you mail your ballot before election day, but it doesn't come until after election day, that it's allowed to be counted. The EO is saying that those ballots can no longer be counted again with no authority to do so. And it also directs the EAC to change the guidelines for voting systems and prohibits the use of barcodes or QR codes on voting systems. And there are 11 states that now do that. And should this go into effect, that means the voting system in these 11 states, plus the District of Columbia, will not be able to be used. And so we see, as Amir said and Joanne, you alluded to, there's this relentless push to make it harder for people to be able to register and vote. And one of the things both the SAVE Act and this EO undermines is the National Voter Registration Act. And I know that the League is very proud to have played a central role in the passage of the National Voter Registration Act. And in fact, was the lead, one of the lead plaintiffs in the attempts to introduce documentary proof of citizenship in 2013 and 2016. And so I know for the League, this is very personal. In addition to registering, the registering work, the voter registration work that we do. And the other thing that I wanted to mention, and just this is a mantra for me, like with other executive orders that we're seeing, the president has no authority to do this. The Constitution grants the authority over elections to Congress regarding time, place, and manner in federal elections and the states. And so one of the things that the League did immediately after the passage of the publication of this executive order was to write to the EAC to let them know this is unlawful and they don't need to act. So we did that before we filed the litigation to address
Marcia, would you say
the
what the EAC is? There may be some who don't
yes,
know.
the Election Assistance Commission. And so the election, the EO is addresses the Election Assistance Commission, which has the authority to change guidelines regarding elections. And all the things that I mentioned that it's asking to do, particularly the documentary proof of citizenship requirement on the federal form, it gave the EAC 30 days to make these changes. And so the first thing we did was to send a letter to the EAC reminding them that they're an independent federal agency. The president has no authority to ask them to do this. And then on April 1st, we filed a lawsuit along with a series of nonpartisan organizations, including it's both the League of Women Voters US and the League of Women Voters Arizona, and I'll talk about why Arizona in a moment. The Hispanic Federation, the NAACP, the Organization of Chinese Americans, and the Asian and Pacific Islander American Vote organizations. One of the reasons why we included the League of Women Voters Arizona is that Arizona actually has documentary proof of citizenship on its state form, and actually asked the EAC when it first passed the law requiring documentary proof of citizenship to add that requirement to the federal form, and the EAC said no. And then when Georgia and Kansas also added documentary proof of citizenship to the state form, Georgia has still not yet implemented it. Kansas did and was struck down in litigation. The EAC once again said no. And so Arizona right now really relies on the federal form to avoid the documentary proof of citizenship requirement. So they would be immediately harmed if this is added to the federal form, because they have an election this year, a congressional election this year, and they also have no other recourse. Other states can theoretically, if this was allowed to be implemented, if the SAVE Act is allowed to be implemented, would states would not be required to put this on to add a documentary proof of citizenship to their state voter registration form. So there would be an opportunity there for voters who don't have the documentary proof of citizenship, the documents needed to that are required. But in Arizona, if the documentary proof of citizenship is added to the federal form, there were 53,000 voters in 2024 in Arizona who registered only using the federal form, not having to show documentary proof of citizenship. And so the lawsuit that we filed, the claims include that the president has no authority to ask the EAC to change the federal voter registration form. In fact, the EO is asking the EAC to do something that is unlawful, and also that this requirement disproportionately targets vulnerable American citizens. And so there's going to be we filed for a preliminary injunction because of the 30 days requirement within the EO, and there's going to be a hearing this week on that preliminary injunction motion. And let me see if there's anything else I missed before open up for questions. I think I covered most of it, and if I didn't, I'm sure it'll come up in the Q&A. So I'll stop there for now, and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Marcia. One thing we might add to everything that was said is, in a federal system, the way we have it in the United States, it is the states that have the authority to govern elections. And they're asking to turn the whole system on its head. And it's a very deeply important aspect of it. So here's what I'm going to recommend. If you have a question or a comment and you're on video, raise your hand and let me see it. Or if you look at the bottom of your screen, there's an icon that looks like a little heart and it says react. And one of the reactions you can choose is to raise a hand, and I'll see the hand come up in the square with your name on it. So that way I know you have a question or a comment. If everybody starts talking all at once, we just lose the whole conversation. So let me start by asking, is there anybody who would like to raise a question or make a comment? Uh, okay, Deirdre.
Yes, good evening. I posted a comment in the chat. I feel so deeply. The president has no authority to make laws, but he has assumed the authority of the other branches of government. And in the process, he has disrupted our lives. My concern is these changes are long lasting. And I feel that our organizations are largely ineffective against him. Am I wrong?
Do you have that directed to any particular speaker?
Oh, I apologize to you, Mrs. Johnson.
Yes. No, the thing about the executive orders is that, as you noted, they're unlawful. And we do have processes in place to address that illegality. And so that's what we're doing. We are challenging those yeah, executive orders, and others are across a lot of what is happening. So while I would agree with you that the president has been very effective in putting forth a narrative that what he's saying, like he's a king and by fiat he can declare all the unlawful actions he's doing with executive orders, the reality is that he can't. And there is going to be litigation to stop this, our litigation and ongoing litigation, because he is actually testing the boundaries of our constitutional system as we're seeing across the board. And we are going to have to really push for to support our courts, the rulings of our courts, and to continue to speak up. I mean, it's less than 100 days in this administration. We're going to have 100 days at the end of the month. And so we can't be deterred by, what we're seeing already. This is going to be a long fight ahead for us. We're going to use all the tools available to us, including the courts. But one of the things that Amir and I are very well aware of is that litigation takes a long time. And so it's going to be up to us to make sure that we're raising our voices in all the ways we have available to us, to push back on what the president is doing. And ultimately, I believe we will prevail, but it is going to be a long fight. That I agree with, but I don't concede victory, his victory,
Thank you, Marcia.
in that
Well,
fight.
one thing that I'd add to that, and Marcia is exactly right, that this is going to be a long fight, and that there are multiple efforts on multiple different fronts to push back against this. One thing that I've found that is really interesting about this particular fight with the SAVE Act and the executive order is that what we've seen is a tremendous amount of organic and bipartisan opposition to these efforts, a recognition among state election officials, among state elected officials like secretaries of state and governors in both parties, that the executive order is clearly unconstitutional, that documentary proof of citizenship would have a tremendously negative impact on the ability of people to register to vote. We've seen a huge amount of organic attention on the issue, on social media, mainstream media. And so there is a groundswell of opposition that is effectively pushing back against this effort, in addition to the lawsuits and the lobbying effort in Congress. And so it's all important. It's all we need all of this to happen in order to effectively push back. And so I think, as bad as these efforts are, there, I feel like there is the opposition is meeting the moment, at least as of right now. And, fingers crossed we get good outcomes in these lawsuits, which like Marcia really, I think, described really well how clearly unconstitutional the executive order is. And so I'm hoping that the courts do the right thing here and enjoin the executive order, because that there's just no basis in law for it. And then the other thing is, I want to be clear, neither the SAVE Act nor the executive order are in effect right now. I've heard a lot of discussion about, oh, well, now we need to provide documentary proof of citizenship. Just want to be clear, neither one of these is in effect right now. And so we are still, we're still able to push back without feeling the impact of these efforts yet.
Call on Lori and then Ruby, but before I do, I just want to make one comment. I recommend that you watch the Rachel Maddow show in the evening. Clearly, she's a partisan. Clearly, she has a point of view. But what she has intentionally done is every night she covers what's called the pushback. She reports on all of these organic demonstrations that are happening all over the country. And some of the sizes of the crowds is astonishing. It's up to the 50, 60,000 people in some places. And then she reports on the smaller communities and how they're pushing back when something occurs in their community that has been caused that hurts them. And I know for myself, I get a lot of strength out of seeing the American people coming out and saying, no, we won't let you do this to us. So I throw that recommendation in. Lori.
This is for Marcia. Which court has jurisdiction over this lawsuit? I ask because sometimes, nowadays especially, it seems to matter. Which court?
Yeah, so we filed in the District Court of the District of Columbia. But interestingly, I think there are 19 Democratic AGs who filed against the EO in Massachusetts. So there are two cases currently happening right now, pushing back against the EO, but ours is in the District of Columbia.
Thank you.
Anything else, Lori?
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Ruby.
Oh, well, first of all, thank you, Amir, as well as Marcia, for being with us tonight. My question is for Amir. You mentioned, of course, that the House has passed this SAVE Act. And in that, you also mentioned the fact that 4 Democrats also voted with the majority, a slim majority of Republicans. So I think my question is, I guess 2 parts. Why have you found that these 4 Democrat representatives voted for this act? Because of everything that you said, it doesn't seem like it's anything that would surfacely be in favor of this act, since there is no proof that voter fraud is a issue unless it was in their congressional districts. And my second part of the question is, when we call our senators, I would like to either see them in person, because we do have a planned town hall coming up. How can we say to them to rebuttal what the what the House has voted, so that we can have some grounds to say why? We know why, but I want to know what some of their lingo may be that they'll say, we will vote for this act in the Senate. So that's my question.
Sure. So on the first question about why the four Democrats in the House voted for it, you know, I wish I could get inside of the minds of politicians. I can't, unfortunately, but I will say for at least three out of the four, my assumption is that it was really a political vote. They are in what I would say are swing districts, or at least their constituencies are more moderate than most of the rest of Congress. And so they likely made a political calculation that this would play well in their districts. One of the members of Congress from Washington, she issued a statement that was kind of really contorted. She said, of course, I support documentary proof of citizenship. I don't support making it more difficult for people to vote, but I knew that this didn't have a chance to pass in the Senate, and so I went ahead and voted for it. And so there's not a lot of, I think, logic that went into some of these calculations apart from purely political logic, I think. That's for three out of the four. There's a fourth member who is from Hawaii who is in a very safe Democratic district who I think we're all just kind of confused about why he voted for it. I don't know if he's issued a statement since the vote. I haven't looked in the past couple of days, and he might have provided an explanation. I'm not sure, but I can't venture a guess for him. For the second part of your question, in terms of kind of questions that you might be able to pose to members while they're back home during recess, or ways to push back against some of the narratives that they or some of the justifications that they might provide. I think some of the statistics that I quoted, more than 140 million Americans don't have a passport, 21 million Americans don't have any of the necessary documents to prove citizenship. I think 69 million married women would be impacted because their names are different from the name that might be on their birth certificate. Those are all useful kind of data points that you can cite in terms of the impact and why you feel that the SAVE Act doesn't serve the interests of their constituents. I think the responses that we've seen, there are a couple of kind of general categories of responses that we've seen from members who have voted for it. So one is, well, it we already, for the most part, we already have to use a voter ID to vote. This is just, saying that you have to show an ID to be able to register. The reality is here, number one, voter ID in and of itself, we know photo ID has uh, tremendous burdens and disproportionate burdens on certain communities, including Black voters and voters of color. And so it's not a justification to say that, well, we already have to show our driver's license or some other form of photo ID in order to vote. Second, this is a layer on top of photo ID, right? This is an even more difficult category of documents that you have to be able to find in order to not only to not just to vote, but to register to vote or to re-register to vote. And so, again, like I said, more than 140 million Americans don't have a passport. 21 million don't have any of these forms of IDs. And so, I think that that's the response that I would say is that this is not like just regular photo ID to vote. This is actually much more burdensome than photo ID laws are. The other kind of response that we've heard is specific to Real ID, which Marcia mentioned as part of the executive order. There's been kind of this justification that, well, all states are moving towards Real ID. Many states have already adopted Real ID in full and require everyone to get Real ID. And so Real ID is one of the specific forms of ID you can show to prove citizenship, and therefore, what's the problem? Everyone is going to have a Real ID anyway. But the reality is, and Marcia mentioned this, is that there are only a handful of states that have real IDs that actually show that you are a citizen. For the most part, real IDs don't actually prove citizenship, and we've seen that the rollout of Real ID has been incredibly slow, incredibly expensive, and for states to now adopt a different form of Real ID that will prove citizenship will entail a tremendous amount of expense. It will take a long time. It will be confusing for people. And so it's no answer, I think, to just say, well, Real ID is, makes this easy because it's much more complicated than that.
We have two
I have a
questions.
couple more arguments
Go ahead,
to
Marcia.
add to that. One of the things I would say about voter ID is that the voter ID is not a proof of citizenship requirement, right? So just because I need to show my driver's license doesn't show that I proves that I'm a citizen. So, as Amir was saying, it's much more onerous than the ID requirements. I got a chance to sit in the gallery when the debate was happening last week, was it? Yeah. Um, last week on this bill, and the congressman from Wisconsin that was leading the debate on the Republican side, he kept saying, you have to show ID in order to get a beer or, get medication. But none of those are proof of citizenship, right? I don't have to prove I'm a citizen to get a beer or to get a prescription. The other thing I would mention is that documentary proof of citizenship was considered when Congress passed the National Voter Registration Act in 1993, and it was rejected. And the only Congress at that time determined that having the signature attestation that you're a citizen was enough, and it has proved to be enough because, as Amir said, there is no record of substantial amounts of non-citizens voting. In fact, there's minuscule evidence, and as Amir said, it's often because people made a mistake. So the system as it is currently works, and there's no reason to add a burden that would make it harder for millions of eligible citizens um, to be able to vote. And then I would also add that to get a passport costs around $165 and a 2-month waiting period. So that not only are there the millions of voters who don't have a passport, there's a substantial financial cost associated with getting a passport. And so, and to spend all of that cost to be able to exercise a fundamental right, um, that's just untenable. So I would add those to the list of why this is such a horrible bill. And yeah.
Thank you.
A couple of other things. Sorry, Marcia raised some great points that I just want to add on to specific to Mississippi because this issue about passports is so important. And Mississippi is one of the states that has the lowest rate of people with passports. And so when you're talking to your senators or you want to hold your members of the House accountable for their vote because 3 out of our 4 members of the House of Representatives voted for the SAVE Act, you want to tell them that the vast majority of Mississippians do not have a passport. And so they voted against the clear interests of their own constituents by voting in favor of the SAVE Act. They made it harder for their own constituents to be able to register to vote. And then the other piece of this that I didn't mention, but I think is really important, particularly for those of you who are or have served as an election official or know your election officials, like your election commissioners or your circuit clerks, is that the SAVE Act also creates civil and criminal penalties for election officials who register people to vote without demanding their proof of citizenship, even if it might have been a mistake that they might have forgotten to ask for the relevant document. and they register someone to vote, they face civil and criminal penalties for that type of issue. And so that's why you've seen, and this was mentioned in the chat, that's why you've seen election officials from both political parties voice opposition to the SAVE Act because it could create huge problems for election officials who are already overburdened, who are already facing threats to their safety, who are already facing, in many states, criminal penalties for certain aspects of election administration. And so it makes their lives much harder as well.
Thank you. We have 3 questions. I'm going to take them in the order in which they were received. But before I do that, I just want to make one comment, which is in recent decades, the way voting districts have been designed has been enhanced by computers, and we get these bizarre shaped districts that can include people down to single digits, where whoever represents that district has a greater interest in passing a primary than a national election. And we see that in a lot of these votes, that districts or people you would think would not vote the way they do, if they're threatened with a primary because they don't vote the way they're being told to vote, they will change their vote. And sadly, that happens a lot. Okay, the first question is from Savina Schoenhofer, and she says, I'm going to direct this specifically to Marcia. Is there any value in continuing to brand the League of Women Voters a nonpartisan organization other than the benefits that come from a 501c3 status? How can we language our efforts as nonpartisan? I would like for the League members present to share their thoughts. So we'll start with Marcia.
Yeah, I think there's tremendous value in continuing to be nonpartisan. When we're pushing back against suppressive voting laws, we're not supporting one candidate or another. We are standing in our legacy, our history, and our mission to ensure that every eligible voter has access to the ballot. And I think taking a nonpartisan position really strengthens the what we're fighting for. So I would reject the view that fighting against laws that make it harder for all eligible Americans to vote is partisan. It isn't. We're not focusing on one party or another, one candidate or another. We're focused on the voter, and that's not partisan action.
Thank you, Marcia. The next question comes from Elaine Talbot Madison, and she says, things like the SAVE Act do damage the work of secretaries of state, no matter what their party. That's why you see pushback from some Republican secretaries of state, as well as their Democratic peers. She doesn't address it to anybody in particular, but if either of you have a comment.
Yeah, I would agree that this law doesn't just make it harder for voters to vote, it makes it harder to administer elections effectively because it places this unfunded mandate on election officials to now have to just have more of an onerous task of registering to vote, and we there need to be focus on also getting the election administration functions ready for election day and being at risk of criminal prosecution is just going to have a chilling effect on them and also puts a target on their backs as well. And I think that's why they have come out. No one is asking for this, Bill.
And we have a comment from Ruth Odell, who is our co-president at the state league level. and she wants us to know that the League of Women Voters is not a 501c3 organization. We are a 501c4 foundation that we have an educational foundation that is a C3, but only use the funds for educational efforts. So
We're both a C3 and a C4. We're
Okay,
both.
thank you. Effie, you were next. You're not in the chat, but you were raising your hand.
Well, actually, I have a comment, but a question. Why is it? Well, my comment is, don't they understand that Republicans can have the same problem voting as we do, or do they just think that
Who is the lady in your
Republicans?
sentence? Who is
Anyone who answers it.
Okay.
That Republicans will have the same problems that we do to register to vote, or what someone said about they have figured out that who vote anyway. I don't understand how they can target and think it's just going to affect the Democrats. And then the other question is, why is it that they seem to target women? Because some women maybe have been married like 2 or 3 times, but the man name never changed. His last name never changed. So it seems like it's targeted toward women, because we change our name if we divorce somebody.
I'll take a stab at that, and if Marcia and Amir want to jump in. First of all, when you combine that stance with what else is coming out of the White House, especially against DEI initiatives, there seems, and this is my interpretation, my editorial comment, it seems they think women and people of color and other communities are the people who don't vote for them. And there's probably an interest in disempowering those people who they think don't vote for them. Marcia or Amir, do you have any other comment?
Yeah, I would say, Joanne, that's in line. What I was going to say, if you look at people without passports, there are about 50% of Americans, eligible voters without passports, but it's 65% of African Americans. If you look at who's unlikely to have even, the birth certificate to show proof of citizenship, there are many elderly Black and brown voters who never even got a birth certificate. And then we also see that, 69 million women would be affected, as you noted, Effie. And so it is targeting who is likely to vote for one party or another as well.
Okay, Barbara Powell has her virtual hand raised.
I was just going to express a concern I have as someone that's been in Mississippi long enough to remember the days when it was difficult for a person of color to register, that we could see how having to go in person to register may, before you can register an election official under this act, would have to approve it or have seen you. It seems like that gives another way that there can be a reluctance or a pressure against somebody that's different, especially if that official has possibility of criminal charges if they make a mistake. That's it. seems like we in Mississippi have an extra reason to be concerned about this.
I think so. I think that that's spot on. We don't have online voter registration in Mississippi, at least for new registrants, but we do have a rich history of registering people through voter registration drives, which obviously the league is a part of that very rich history in Mississippi. And part of why voter registration drives are so important here is exactly what you noted, Barbara, which is it can be intimidating, or people, Black people have been intimidated, not only intimidated, but have been threatened and physically assaulted and even killed when going to an elections office to register in person. And so voter registration drives have been and continue to be an incredibly important way for Black people in Mississippi to register to vote. And this would directly threaten and undermine the ability of groups like the League and others to do voter registration drives. And so I think, what you've noted about our history and why it's so important to offer these alternative ways of registering is totally right, Barbara.
Thank you. We have Linda Bishop asking for a clarification. She says, is it correct that the proposal is that either a birth certificate or a passport will be accepted to vote? Is it limited to those two?
So it is a passport. You can use one of the enhanced real IDs, which are 5 states. You can use a military ID if it shows citizenship, or you can use your birth certificate along with another ID. And again, this is not to vote, but just to register to vote is what the SAVE Act is targeting.
Thank you. And Ruby has her virtual hand up. And let me just note that we are now at 7:25, and one of our guests do have to leave around 7:30. So if you have a question or a comment, now's the time to raise your hand. And first we'll go to Ruby, then we'll go to Don Mason.
And I'll be quick with my question. This is again from Marcia. One of the things as I read through the I guess excuse me, not the what I'm trying to say, the order that you all are filing, the suit that you're filing, that's what I'm trying to get to. Sorry. One of the things I read was that this order is trying to decertify voter machines across the country. Now, can you elaborate on that just a little bit? What are y'all seeing in that?
So the Election Assistance Commission provides guidance on voting systems.
Mm-hmm.
And they have provided guidance that allow, I think there are 11 states to use QR codes or barcodes on their voting systems.
Okay.
And this EO specifically prohibits the use of QR codes or barcodes on voting systems. And so what that would mean is that particularly in those 11 states and the District of Columbia that do that, they wouldn't be able to use their voting machines in order to vote. And there's actually a multi-year system to get this certification and the guidance from the EAC. And so it would really impact the ability for those states to have elections if something like this goes into effect. Particularly, we have midterms just next year, and they wouldn't be able to get the new machines and the certification necessary to have elections if this law was able to go into effect.
Okay, because I know we here in Mississippi, of course, we use voter machines, and so that's what I was wondering. I know we also had a paper ballot, so I just didn't know if that was that was involved with that as well. So thank you for that clarification.
Part of this effort, just jumping in really quickly, part of this effort is to push all states towards hand counting ballots, which we know is incredibly inefficient. You can imagine it takes a really long time to count ballots if we're counting every single ballot by hand. It's also way more error prone than counting by machine. And so, this has been an effort that we've seen again, stretching back to before the 2024 election. This is a continuation of that effort to try to push all states and all counties to do hand counting of ballots. And part of it is, to make election sabotage possibly easier. And so I just wanted to provide that context because I think it's really important. It's an important part of the EO, and I'm glad that you raised it.
Thank you. And Don, I think you're going to be our last question. If you have a question or a comment, Don Mason.
Well, I've got a couple of questions, which I fear might sound silly, but anyway, first off, I may have missed this earlier, but if either the legislation or the executive order were to take effect, would they apply only to new registrations, or would all of us around the country already registered have to scramble around and show proof of citizenship in order to continue our registration? In other words, is this going to apply to everybody? And secondly, is this somehow going to apply only to federal elections? If not, if it applies to every single election, including local elections in states that, there's all kinds of voting systems, then how in the world can they justify that?
Who wants to take that?
I can start off. Well, on the first question, it would apply to new registrants and anyone who is re-registering to vote. For example, if they moved to a new county or a new state. Yeah, and so it wouldn't require if you stay put at your home and you don't need to re-register or update your registration, then it wouldn't apply. But I will say that there are provisions that would make it easier or that would require purging of the voter rolls based on purported non-citizenship. And so, for example, in the executive order, there are provisions that allow Doge, the Elon Musk agency, to collect certain information from states with respect to their voter rolls, and then cull through those voter rolls to identify purported non-citizens, and then send that information to the Department of Justice and to the state attorneys general offices and to state election officials to encourage them or to pressure them to try to purge voter rolls based on purported non-citizenship. And we know, just based on the work that Doge has already done with respect to, the budgets of federal agencies and laying off federal workers, that they are not the model of accuracy. And so there is significant concern that that type of provision could result in voters being purged from the rolls, which would, of course, then require them to re-register with the documentary proof of citizenship.
Thank you.
Anything else?
The second question. Go ahead, Marcia.
Yeah, on the second question, so both the SAFE Act and the EO would apply to the federal form. But what generally happens is that rather than have two systems, states tend to adapt, to one system. And so it's likely that other states will follow suit of the Arizonas and the Kansas and the Georgias, and also require documentary proof of citizenship for the state voter registration form as well. So we could find ourselves in a situation where that's required for all elections.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that's 7:32. I hope we haven't held you too long, Amir. But I want to thank our speakers tonight for an incredibly informed conversation. Yes, absolutely. I wish we could let you hear all of our applause, but it's so important today for this kind of information to be made available and accessible to many, many citizens. And just a big virtual hug and a thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Enjoyed
Yes, thank you so much.
And I know you're both very busy, and taking out time to do this is very much appreciated. Thank you.
it. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Everyone, take care. Bye.